This is CNBC Reports. As the day comes to an end in the U.S., we give you a first look at the day ahead. Your tomorrow starts right now.
Investors who put money in Bernard Madoff's Wall Street firm fear they have been wiped out. As we first reported last night, Madoff is accused in a $50 billion fraud case, accused of running a giant Ponzi scheme. He was arrested yesterday. The remaining assets of the investment firm were frozen today. We're talking more now about what happens in an investigation like this one and how you can protect your money. What are the red flags? Mark Powers is head of the Securities Litigation and Regulatory Enforcement Practice at Baker Hostetler, and Tom Gorman is chair of the SEC Litigation Practice Group at Porter Wright. Let me start with you, Mr. Powers. You've been familiar with people who have pulled some fast ones. You were involved at one point in the Regas case. Is this the biggest fraud you've ever heard of, and how did he do it?
Well, certainly, you know, for a Ponzi scheme, to the extent to which the allegations are true and there's $50 billion involved, it probably ranks up there as being one of the largest. But we'll have to wait and see if, in fact, that is the number. I mean, the way that a lot of things occur, and it's been a personal tragedy for the investors that were with Mr. Madoff. It really, in my view, occurs or comes about in one of two ways. Because these things, they just have a pattern to themselves. Either the man started making investments that went bad, and perhaps he will have not wanted to tell his investors, thought he could make it up, and started engaging in more and more activities of using Peter's money to pay Paul. Or alternatively, it was a lavish lifestyle that he thought he'd be able to make up with in better times. But with this environment that we're in now, with the financial crisis that we're in now, and the stock market the way it is, he could no longer keep up with what he was doing, and it all unraveled right before our eyes to the terrible effect
Mr. Gorman,
of today.
let me just say that I think one of the great tragedies of this year has been, and really of this decade, has been the way we've lost trust in all kinds of institutions. This one has got to damage what is already a Swiss cheese, cheesecloth of trust on Wall Street. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that's exactly right. One of the real problems that spins out of a real debacle like this is a loss of investor confidence. And as you said, coming into this market, investors are already jittery. People are already worried about what's safe and what's not safe. People are looking to the government to underwrite everything. And now here, this just compounds that, because what you have here is a lot of very sophisticated investors. They're putting their money at risk with somebody that they personally know in this fund. And the person on Main Street, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Main Street, have got to be sitting there looking at their 401k and saying to themselves, if these sophisticated investors are losing their money, if these kinds of people who are very knowledgeable about the markets are losing $50 billion, if in fact that's the number, then what are we going to do? How are we going to protect our money? And that's a real problem for everybody.
What's going on inside the SEC at a time like this? I mean, you know, the old joke is the SEC is more a coroner than a cop. They never really prevent anything, but they show up with their sirens after the bodies are on the floor. In this particular case, did the SEC look at the stories that were written about Madoff? Did they just look down the wrong alley, do you think, or was it just invisible to them?
I think there's really two things going on here that's actually very unique in this case. On the one side of this case, it looks like, and it's not real clear, but it looks like the actual fund itself is what's called a hedge fund. And if that's right, those are unregulated, so the SEC can only really do what you're talking about. They can go in and do a post-mortem. They can do what they're doing now, try to gather the assets and salvage things. But there's another side to this case that makes it really unique, and that is the hedge fund was tied to a broker-dealer. And there had been questions about this fund and its relationship to the broker-dealer that have been going back for years and years. In fact, at one point in the early 90s, this fund got enmeshed in an SEC investigation and an enforcement action. So there's a question here about adequacy of regulation. But there's also a question here about where were the regulators? What happened to all these red flags?
They were looking in the cabinets when there was some blood on the floor. You know, I want to get back to the key question that a lot of the audience wants to know. And Thomas, you raised it about the investor confidence and should people really question their money? And you can answer yourself if you want to. Mark, is that can people do actually anything beyond reading their statements or moving to safe investments here? I mean, what can we learn? What can we take away that actually helps us moving forward?
Well, I think there are a few things. I mean, one is you really want to make sure that apart from the trust by the person's word that they give you in these types of investments, that you kind of maybe do a little bit more digging on your own, perhaps, and make sure that the person is affiliated with very reputable accounting firms that are doing the audits of the financial statements each year when you're getting your reports, to maybe go into the offices there and make sure that you're kind of seeing the nature of the operation. And most importantly, make sure you understand the nature of the investment strategies of that advisor. But come the end of the day, you know, the stock market, the financial system, in some degree, is based upon trust and confidence. And it's no different than what happened with the seizure of the financial markets and credit facilities. There's got to be some degree of trust, and you have to rely upon that. And it's unfortunate when guys like this end up, if it turns out to be his admission that he engaged in this stuff occurs.
So, Mark, let me just ask a question. If I was unlucky enough to have money in that group, they've appointed, I believe it as a receiver or some sort of person, a judge or an attorney to monitor it. What do I do to find out whether I got anything left? Do I just wait for that person to tell me, oh, well, all you got left of your $25 million is $8?
Well, I guess it's partially a question of how much money you still do have. I mean, to the extent to which you don't have much money, then you have a different calculus. But, you know, you right now have a receiver that's been appointed. His job and responsibility by the court is to really kind of track down what occurred. Unfortunately, that process takes years because you have to bring in forensic accountants. You have to go through all the millions of transactions. And as Linda Thompson, the director of the SEC, said, this thing will, as the days and weeks progress, we'll get a better handle how this occurred and the nature and extent of it. You need to look at perhaps maybe whether or not there are other facilitators, other persons that under the securities law would be called aiders and abettors. And to the extent, you know, the accounting firms, were there banks that were offering credit that maybe should have seen things. And maybe by looking at those individuals who have solvency and who have maybe assets, determine whether or not it's worth going after them if in fact the receiver doesn't.
Mark Powers, thank you very much. Tom Gorman, thank you for giving us so much of your Friday evening. We appreciate it. And we'll get you back here soon again to talk about this or maybe something on a little happier note. Thank you very much. Next.